Hey folks, welcome back. My name is Cyrus Davis, and today I have another tier list video for you, this time on the post-rotation metagame, now that we have the addition of Journey Together, so some new decks entering the format, some decks leaving the format. People are sort of experimenting with a lot of different stuff right now, and it's sort of, for players who don't have as much time to practice, it might be tough to even tell which of these decks are viable at all and which ones should be left to the bulk bin. So let's go ahead and just go through one at a time here. We'll start with Archaludon, book that into tier 2. I think that it's the Arch double build, usually with Starmie as well, to break Pikachu EX. The Starmie just allows you to go ahead and place 2 damage counters, one to your opponent's Pokemon, and then it discards itself, I believe. Yeah. So it just allows you to get around Pikachu EX's ability. And of course, we're playing the Hops double for some, when you evolve into it, bring up one of your opponent's Pokemon, so it just allows you to gust your opponent's Pokemon up without having to use Boss's Orders for the turn, or play something like Pokemon Catcher. So Archaludon, with this double Starmie combo, definitely pretty strong, but in my opinion, lacking in the consistency department. I am going to include, like sort of other Archaludon builds in this too. I think that because the only other Arch build we have on the list here is the Hops deck with Zacian, and honestly, the double build also plays one Zacian, so you can kind of mix these up. I'm gonna count this as like Hops specifically, the more with like a 2/2 Archaludon and more of a Zacian focus, and put that in tier 4. I think the Hops deck is really, really bad. I don't think it's worth playing much. And then I'm going to include all other Archaludon variants here. I think they're all around tier 2, even though a lot of them are fairly different. I'm not a big fan of the build with Scizor. I think it's too inconsistent. I think that at least this build, you have free Gust, so you can play more draw supporters, which helps, but it's still kind of tough to get your early game consistency going. I think that I've tried the Poison build as well with the Pecharunt, and that is also lacking a little bit in the consistency department, but is probably the strongest when it does set up. Just does not have as many. It can't take advantage of Archaludon as well as, of course, the double build, which is sort of focused around Miraidon. But getting to start a couple of prize cards ahead if you get the Poison knockout is really nice. However, the deck does feel really, really bad if you don't get a good start with the Poison package. That is one downside to that build compared to this build. And then there's also the Dunsparce build. You'd also play regular Duraludon or Archaludon, which I don't think is very strong. I think it needs some other options right now. I think the Dunsparce build is honestly the strongest in overall consistency. It does what it wants to most games. You can play some pretty interesting cards with the Dunsparce. You get the Dunsparce EX, which is a really nice bonus. So I think that might actually be the best build. But all 3 of those builds, they all have some pros, significant pros and cons. And I think I'd square them all away in tier 2 here. Next, DengoPult Iron Thorns. I'm going to put this in tier 3 because, I think in theory, Iron Thorns is still good against a couple of things. It's, pretty good into walls, right? It allows you to get around the melodic. Very good into walls, actually. And then it's good into Archaludon. Pretty good into Charizard. Solid into Raging Bolt, but it's not really needed for a lot of these matchups, right? I think that other DengoPult builds are just better. So I don't think there's a lot of reason to play the Thorns build. I don't think you need the Thorns. I guess if you really just wanted to beat walls, that may be the best reason to play. But otherwise, I think that other Pult builds are better into most matchups. Next, we'll do PultZard. We'll just go through all the Pult builds here. I'm going to put PultZard in tier 3 as well. In my early testing, it's just been very non-functional. You can play heavy Klefki counts or multiple Badoo and do all these sort of things to try to slow down your opponent while you set up. But it's just, the deck has lost too much consistency to be running 2 stage 2 lines anymore. It's just, it does not work to me. And it doesn't feel worth it. The Zard does not feel like it offers enough to the deck to justify how much less consistent it is than other builds. DengoPult PultNoir, of course, is, I honestly don't know if anything is S tier. I'm going to put it up in tier 1 for now. Maybe I'll move it up into S tier later. But DengoPult PultNoir, very, very good. Has not really lost that much to rotation. Of course, lost the Lumineon Rotom engine, but is not as reliant on it as some other decks. I posted a list with Brock Scouting, which adds a lot of consistency to your early game, and Squawkabilly X. So you have some substitutes to have those strong early games. Lance is definitely a big loss, but overall, all right. This deck can still just beat anything. I think that Walls is obviously its worst matchup, but every other matchup is very, very winnable. Close. I don't know if it has like many like actually unfavorable matchups. To be honest, like it's a lot of them. It has like maybe 40-60s, you know, where it's slightly unfavorable. But even then, like there are not that many matchups that are even 60-40 into DengoPult other than Walls. So definitely. Very strong deck. Honestly, I'm almost convincing myself to move it up to S tier here, but I do think it's the consistency hit from rotation is significant enough that you kind of feel it. Sometimes it's just like brick, and the starts are too slow. Definitely feels like you are spending, once you get into the game, you're still DengoPult Dusknoir, but it definitely feels like you're spending way more time getting into the game, which is what allows decks like these like Archaludon Poison decks to like punish it really heavily early game, or like future. As a deck that can capitalize on that really well as well. And plus although Walls is your only really bad matchup, it is pretty popular right now still, I think. Raging Bolt's, definitely very losable as well. So, do we have another DengoPult build here? I don't think so. So we'll go ahead and move on to Walls, which I think is tier 1. I've seen a lot of people sort of devaluing Walls. I'm not specifically with the Noivern. It's just going to be, to me, I have the Walls list posted on my channel already with Melodic, Fridgraph, Munkidori, and Cornerstone. I think that's the way to go with it right now. My list is still the same as it was when I posted that. Same with the DengoPult Dusknoir. I don't think I've changed those lists since I've made those videos. But Walls, I think people are really under-respecting it. I don't know if it's improper testing. Maybe they aren't seeing some of the lines that Walls can do into its closer matchups, but these techs that people are playing in their lists, although a lot of lists are including answers for Walls, they're not enough, in my opinion. I think that they make it the matchup closer, certainly. TeraBox with Cornerstone, for example, can definitely beat Walls, right? Like it's not no longer like this free matchup. It's closer to 50-50 in my opinion. I think that maybe a slightly unfavorable. I think it's still very, very winnable with the combination of Fridgraph and Munkidori. And you know what? A lot of people still are not going to be playing these counters to Walls once we actually get to major events. That's my take on it. I think that there's no decks that are really playing the proper counters to respect it. I think you have to really fit quite a few things into your deck to actually beat like Walls plus Munkidoris consistently. Pokevital Munkidoris, and like the third boss, I think helps a lot in like 3 boss, 1 counter catcher in my build. Makes a pretty substantial difference in how you're able to approach some of your bad, like the counters to Walls, because a lot of them don't like one-shot your Walls, right? Like they're 2-shotting your Walls and you're thinking off Munkidori. They're reliant on the fact that like eventually they will kill your wall and just win. But if you can just sort of race them by gusting around for things to give up a lot of prize cards and doing extra damage with Adrenabrains and the snipe from Dirty Beam, especially in matchup where you use Fridgraph, that can buy you a lot of time. Even honestly, when you're using Melodic, like Hypno Splash buys a lot of time. So yeah, I think Walls is tier 1. I think people are under-respecting it. And people think honestly, more people should just be playing it. Raging Bolt, I'm also going to put in tier 1. I think, with a Togekiss, this deck is really, really good. The Togekiss adds like a lot to the deck. I'm releasing a masterclass on the deck in a couple of days on the TSS Metafy page. But I think that, like, generally speaking, having the Togekiss in there just improves a lot of your matchups. It's kind of essential in the current metagame, in my opinion, but it does make the deck tier 1. The deck is super, super good at doing what it wants to do. It's very consistent. It has options like Slitherwing to knock out Pikachu EX, so that's not like a major concern as well. It has great single price attacking options now with both Rotom and Slitherwing. And the Togekiss means that you don't necessarily have to worry about your opponent like single prize boarding you out of the game. I think that Raging Bolt is another deck that is super slept on right now. It's just sort of more consistent than most of the other decks in the format. Obviously, it has had to switch to the Noctowl engine, but it is one of the... it doesn't need much out of the Noctowl engine, right? It just needs you to like Noctowl like once, maybe twice to set up. And then it doesn't really need it late game like other decks do. So... I think that Raging Bolt is, very consistent, and I really, any deck that is, like, super, super consistent right now is just going to be good, because a lot of decks aren't. Most decks are kind of a pile right now, so if your deck just does what it wants to do every game, that's going to be enough in a lot of situations. Miraidon, I haven't honestly played Miraidon much in this format. I'm going to go ahead and put it in tier 4. I think that the loss of V's is just too much for it. I don't know, maybe I think that like the thing is like I do like Future, which has a similar game plan, but like with Future, I have been very reliant on that extra amp damage. So I haven't really played them that much in the Rhino. I'm gonna put it in tier 4 for now. It might be more like tier 3. I think that like being able to like early game aggressively Iron Hands is still really good, but the deck is definitely much worse at it. I think it's much worse than Future personally. I think that the fact that I've lost double turbo energy and all your V's has just made it better to just set up your Iron Hands with the Baby Miraidon. It seems and feels a lot more reliable to me. And we'll do Future next, which I think is also tier 1. And I think I am gonna I'll pop DengoPult Dusknoir up to S tier. Because it really can sort of beat anything. But Iron Hands, putting up there in tier 1. It's simply like really just good into the popular metagame right now. Like, think about it this way. We'll just think about it in terms of matchups, right? So I mean, DengoPult is like even matchup, maybe slightly favorable. They usually take a couple of turns before they can start attacking. If they hit turn 2 Rare Candy, that can be great for them, sure. But if they don't, you're getting like a 4 prize lead most of the time, 3 prize lead at least, and then you just have to like, even if they set up just one DengoPult at that point, you can just sort of arm press into Iron Hands, Ampy very much it for 3 prize cards. It's really tough for them, in my opinion, to actually like do anything against you. The Badoo doesn't do that much against you. You just hit it with Peak Acceleration and set up your hands. You can, if you sort of manage your board well, you can play around like Phantom Dive, playing around Heavy Baton, it decently. It definitely depends on how strong the DengoPult sets up, but I think the matchups are like slightly favorable for Future. Bolt is a great matchup. Walls is a very winnable matchup with the combination. You have natural built-in outs with Iron Thorns and the Baby Miraidon. Archaludon is an amazing matchup because of Iron Thorns. Any of the non-Dusknoir DengoPult builds, I think, are a little bit too clunky to keep up with Iron Hands as well. The Iron Thorns build might be a little bit tougher. I don't think anyone's really playing that. And then it's, Iron Thorns does great things against Charizard. And the deck just is super, super aggressive. It starts taking knockouts right away. It puts the pressure on your opponent right away. It forces your opponent to immediately find ways to deal with your Iron Hands. And a lot of decks just aren't built to deal with Iron Hands right now. They're not thinking about it. Their decks aren't there to hit the numbers. They have to do a lot of things to like actually one-shot an Iron Hands. And if you can attack with an Iron Hands twice in a row, then after using Peak Acceleration for 1 prize, which a lot of decks are playing things to get knocked out by Peak Acceleration to set up for the early game, you're going to take like a 5 prize lead a lot of the time, and then just need to seal up that 1 prize somewhere else. There's a lot of different prize mapping to be done with the deck. Every matchup you play just a little bit differently to like map out how you actually want to take your prize cards, since you can take a lot of like 3 prize Imperial matches. It's like when to use Peak Acceleration. If you want to learn more about the deck, I do have a guide for it on Metafy for the Shuffle Squad. You can check it out there. But yeah, I think the deck is very, very well positioned right now. And is definitely one of my top picks for upcoming events. I don't like playing Future, full disclosure. Like, it's not a deck that I enjoy playing. So it's like it's not not my top choice, but right now it is testing super, super well for me. I think it is super strong. And so it is still something that is in my considerations. If you like playing Future, this is definitely a great time to play it. Gholdengo with the Dunsparce. I'll put in tier 2 above Archal. I think you can just sort of play it very similarly to pre-rotation Gholdengo. I mean, you might not even need the Dunsparce, to be honest. I'm testing a list without the Dunsparce as well. That also feels good and just feels like the pre-rotation build. You lose Greninja and Pokestop, you have to make up for that with other consistency cards, and it's definitely going to be slightly less consistent, but so is everything else. I think that might still just be better than fitting in a Dunsparce line, though. I don't know if that necessarily boosts your consistency that much. But all in all, using Make It Rain to one-shot stuff and then like Turrowing when stuff can't quite knock out your Gholdengo is still a really good game plan. You still just outprize map most decks that rely on 2-prize attackers. So, Gholdengo is just still very well positioned Has very similar matchup spread to the one that it did pre-rotation, and those decks are still very popular. It beats, I'd say with like if you play the build with like 2 Turo, has a good Dragon Bolt matchup, has a good Raging Bolt matchup, has a good Future matchup, has a good matchup into Archa. Not as much so into walls, right? You have to play an out. If you don't play a cornerstone out, you just lose, and I don't think it's really worth playing a cornerstone out. It's kind of hard to fit a cornerstone out into Gholdengo, to be honest. TeraBox, one of your closer matchups, and I think that is what keeps the deck. You have to play like Vengeful Punches, or you can play like a Halucha and try to ping the Pikachu. I've seen a couple of weird ways to try to get around Pikachu with Gholdengo, but I think that is probably your toughest matchup. It's just like dealing with Pikachu EX. Any matchup with Pikachu EX attacking is honestly going to be pretty tough, but that is the deck that is utilizing that right now. So, but yeah, Gholdengo definitely still really good. Gholdengo DengoPult tier 1. I'm going to put that up here. I honestly, Gholdengo DengoPult, maybe even S tier. I think that is right up there with DengoPult for me. I think this is like potentially the best deck in the format right now. I wrote an article on this deck for Schmitz's Corner not long ago, so you can. I'm sure all of these things that I am referencing will be linked. But this deck just does not really have bad matchups, to be honest. Like, let's move some of these more popular decks here so we can look at, like, the Dragon Ball matchup is pretty even. You know, they have the Dusknoir does not add that much for them against you. You still are Gholdengo. You can still one-shot the Pults and use Munkidori. You play the matchup very similar to the way you did pre-rotation. You can play Turo in the deck if you really are struggling with the Dragon Ball matchup. But really, this deck just plays like pre-rotation Gholdengo, but instead of Greninja and Pokestop, you use Recon Directives. And then Dragon Ball gives you some very key options into other matchups. So against walls, it's like pretty much a free matchup. Gholdengo one-shots everything except for the cornerstones, which DengoPult deals with very, very easily. A single DengoPult just wipes double cornerstone really easy. Raging Bolt, another very good matchup. Usually they just take they have to take the first prize with 2 prizes down. It's pretty hard for them to take a knockout with just Rotom and no 2 prize Pokemon on board. So usually you're always going to get the first 2 prize knockout. Pretty easy to keep taking them from there, especially against the deck that only plays 1 Iono. Archaludon, just historically favorable matchup, still very favorable. I think the poison build is pretty close, but all other builds are very good. Into Guardy, like pre-rotation, still a good matchup. Guardy is a better matchup, if anything, because we have the DengoPult now, and Guardy is way, way less consistent than it was before. Charizard, much better matchup than it was pre-rotation, now that they don't have Radiant Charizard. Feraligatr is one of your worst matchups. You don't really have great answers to like Mimikyu, Lux Cape, and Munkidori. So this is like this is probably your worst matchup. I'd have to say, just off the top of my head, Feraligatr, I think is your only bad matchup amongst here. TeraBox is fine. When you go first, you can usually just take the prize lead and maintain it. It's pretty tough. Like the only thing they really have that can one shot Gholdengo is Pikachu EX. Which is not easy for them to use multiple times. And if they do want to attack with Pikachu EX, the thing is that they still have to set up other 2-prize Pokemon usually. They have to use Teal Lance or Fez or something to draw more cards. It's pretty hard for them to set up Pikachu EX with just only as their only Terra Pokemon in play. So it's pretty hard for them to even search the Pikachu EX out without putting another Terra Pokemon into play. They have to hope to naturally draw into Nest Ball, open the Rotom, and not need to search out the Pikachu with Noctowl. So a lot of time you can just counter catcher or boss around the Pikachu a couple times for multiple prize cards, but you can also, Phantom Dive also gives you an out to the Pikachu EX ability as well, right? So where the other Gholdengo builds struggle and have to play like weird techs like Vengeful Punch, the Gholdengo DengoPult build does have natural built-in answers to Pikachu EX. You can just hit it for 200 and Iono them to a low hand size, and then go in with counter catcher plus Phantom Dive to take a 4 prize turn or 3 prize turn. You can also swing into it with the DengoPult, so if you hit it with Phantom Dive and Iono them, then they don't just need to reset with the Pikachu, but they need to set up a Clefairy, right? So now they need to get the Pikachu active and attack you with Clefairy. So there's just a lot more ways for you to deal with the TeraBox build with the DengoPult build, and I think that that generally is what makes this build so much better than the other builds in my opinion. And then of course the walls matchup as well. The DengoPult really honestly covers all, like, your worst matchups. This is the best attacker in your worst matchups. And then ultimately, I think that like the recon directives, like just Evo TMing most of the time turn 1 into double Dracloak to have recon directives throughout the game. Most of them you don't even use the Dragon Bolt. You just recon directive replaces Radiant Greninja and Pokestop really well. I think that the deck is very consistent, sets up very well in my experience at least, so would definitely recommend it. Espathra Froslass. I haven't played this deck, so full disclosure as I'm reading this. I have seen it around. I think Espathra is cute to boost the damage of, to, force Pokemon to attack for higher energy costs. DengoPult doesn't like that. Gholdengo doesn't like that. Raging Bolt is honestly kind of fine with that. TeraBox obviously doesn't really like having to spend extra energy either. So I think this is like a solid tier 3 deck. But it's still, honestly, I think it's like fairly well positioned. I'm going to put it in tier 3. I think it's just a little bit too easy to play around. It's a strong concept, but there's so much energy acceleration in the format that a lot of decks can just put an extra energy on their Pokemon without that much of a hassle. Its damage is pretty weak. It's pretty reliant on like setting up Devo TM plays, which get played around by like Munkidori and Turo. So I think it's just a little bit, it's a very cool concept, and so in theory it seems like it'd be strong into a lot of the top decks, but I don't think it's enough. Like sure, like increasing the energy cost alone, like that's great, but I just don't think that the other stuff that it does is enough. I think it's Froslass and Espathra are both like fairly easy cards to play around and join together a little bit harder, but still, I think a pretty easy deck to just like, that is not going to beat players who are really, really skilled or have any experience with the matchup. Gardevoir is going to go into tier 3 as well. Top of tier 3. I know if you've watched any of my tier lists before, you know that I pretty much always add another tier at some point. So here it is. I'm adding another tier right now. Make this pink. I messed up. Tier 4. Tier 5. Tier 3. Gardevoir is going to go into tier 3. I'm going to move these. I think these are all bad decks. To be honest, I think you shouldn't play these. That is why I wanted to move them down a tier. And then, this is fine. So Gardevoir, though, tier 3, I think it's worse than everything above it, better than everything below it. I have been thinking it's fairly underrated, honestly. I think that its consistency is absolutely an issue. No matter what build I've tried out of the deck, consistency is an issue. However, I think that the end Zoroark build of the deck, where you're just sort of trying to play it the same way as pre-rotation Guardian, I think people, like, not getting too fancy with going, like, aggressive on rare candy plays, just going, like, trying to Evo turn 1 every single game. I've liked Secret Box, I've liked Precious Trolley. I think both are pretty good for early game consistency. You're definitely very reliant on hitting it every game. It's really, usually, if you don't find, like, the Evo TM play early on a lot of matchups, you just go down like 4 prize cards before you get set up, and it's brutal. Like, Guardy has always been able to come back from stuff like that, but you don't want to have to go through that like almost every game. And honestly, I think that like right now, that's like a good portion of your games you start down like 4 prize cards without having done too much relevant. Then like the games where you set up quickly, like you just win handily a lot of the time. There's not a lot of counterplay that most of these decks can do to like a strongly set up Guardy board. However, that's just not most games right now for Gardevoir. It is not super consistent. I think it's the deck with the most potential down here. I think that like it's just a matter of someone like figuring out a list that makes the deck actually work like more than 65% of the time. Right now, for me, it's just not there yet. But it's still like it's fine. Like it's still, I think it's a decent deck. I wouldn't like suggest not playing it. The list needs the deck needs work for sure. This is like the Iono's deck. I haven't seen anyone playing this lately. I actually thought it might be okay. I think that it's just like a little bit too much to set up. So I'm gonna put this. I think probably below, very bottom. I think it's not a super real deck. I'm going to put a few other things down here. I think Slowking just does not work either. I've tried Slowking. It was not functional. I'm assuming this is like a Froslass, Badu Munkadori type is what the suggestion is here by just having Froslass, and I don't think that is any good either. I'm not going to particularly sort these. I'm just going to throw them all down here into the bottom. Mamoswine, I'm going to rate really quickly as well. It's going to put it also down here. It just requires way too much deck space for the number of evolutions what we need to play, which is opening up to be very inconsistent. Once it's set up, it's actually like a pretty terrifying deck to play against, with a bunch of just high HP Pokemon that can do a lot of things and dish out a lot of damage, but it's pretty clunky. You open a lot of dead hands. And then Iron Thorns, I'm also going to put like down here. I just don't think it does... It wins enough matchups, to be honest. I think that it can't beat DengoPult, which is already just a huge loss. Like, Archaludon is a great matchup, but Gholdengo is like relatively bad as well. I mean, especially with the Gholdengo with DengoPult build. All they really need to do, like, obviously they can't use coin bonus, but all they need to do is just like find Energy Search Pro to start taking, and then find Superiors on the following turns to deal with your Thorns. So yeah, I mean, even Raging Bolt's not that good of a matchup for Quad Thorns. Without double turbo energy, it's just like not a super real deck. You have to play like Crispins. I just think it's you don't have a good way to power it up anymore. If you had double turbo energy, it might be like okay, but it would still take a terrible matchup to DengoPult. So I don't think it's worth considering either way. Zard Pagos and Zard Pidge, I'm gonna put in the same tier. I think I'm gonna put Zard Pagos a little bit higher because I think it's better against DengoPult with like max belt and less reliant on items. But Zard Pagos, I'm actually gonna put it at the top of tier 2, and then I'll put Zard Pidge in tier 3 here below Guardia. I think obviously both decks have pretty similar game plan. Right now it's mostly just trying to Zard Dusknoir and then like set up Briar plays. There's still a good strategy into a lot of decks. Still good into Bolt. Good into Future. I think it's like solid into Dengo and Archa. DengoPult matchup, still very questionable in my opinion. I think the Zard Pagos list definitely is better against it, but you're still pretty, especially with the Noctowls. With no Pidge, you're more prone to late game hand disruption. So where the Pidge build is more prone to early game disruption, the Pagos build is definitely weaker in the late game. But I think that the deck is still fairly strong. I don't think that it has a terrible time against... None of these are really unwinnable matchups, you know. It doesn't get like hard losses to anything. It's one of the more like flexible, can sort of have a shot against anything decks right now, and it also has a very good TeraBox matchup in my opinion. So that's a big plus for it as well. Which, since I mentioned TeraBox, let's go ahead and do TeraBox next, which I'm going to put up here. I'll put it in S tier with the other two. Pikachu X is just so good. I honestly think like I think a lot of the lists that I have been playing and posting are built with like TeraBox in mind, and respecting it a lot. But most lists are not all lists are prepared to deal with TeraBox. You know, Torrential Pump followed and Pikachu EX, just those two attacks alone, and then like Blood Moon late game being so energy efficient are pretty hard to combat. I think the deck can fizzle out in the late game sometimes, when you've used multiple Noctowls, when you've like had to really scrape your resources to pull off plays that keep you in the game, it can definitely fizzle out, and it definitely has some dud opening hands as well. But overall, I think the deck is like just an incredibly high powerful level, has the options to beat anything. Every deck has to like really carefully play against it to actually beat and play around all of the options that it has. So it's a very difficult deck to play against as well. I think that it's going to just remain. Probably the attackers might swap out. It is a toolbox deck. We might sort of see this swap around. But I think as long as this deck is in format, it is going to be very, very powerful. Feraligatr, I'm going to put up here in tier 1 as well. It was the big winner of the event in Japan. I do think it is a little bit inconsistent, and the game plan is not foolproof, but it's definitely still very strong. A lot of things lose to Retreat Lock, a lot of things lose to just Mimikyu Lux Cape, a lot of things lose to just big damage from Feraligatr, and then like Adrenabrain damage setting stuff up. I mean, Retreat Lock and Mimikyu in general are, you know, always going to be a combo that is really good in the metagame, as we know from Snorlax's last format. It definitely feels like it's sort of taking a lot of the matchups that Snorlax had, you know, that's really, it's the new Lax, realistically. It's definitely, I think, stronger in some situations than Lax is, and weaker in some situations than Lax is. It's definitely not as consistent, but you're still sort of trying to do the same thing in a lot of matchups. It has a few different win cons, and I think, like, TeraBox, very good matchup. DengoPult Dusknoir, weaker matchup. I think this is the biggest problem for the deck, is the DengoPult Dusknoir matchup. You definitely, I think, have to play Melodic to beat it consistently, at least. And you really don't want to play Melodic, I don't think. Like, I've tried a lot of games with both variants, with and without Melodic, and the list without Melodic feels so much better, but you just are not wanting, like, you have to dodge DengoPult. And that's sort of the problem with Feraligatr right now, and what keeps it from being, like, S tier. But, like, otherwise, like, it beats TeraBox, it beats Bolt. It struggles with walls, but honestly, a lot of people are sleepy on walls right now. And it's not that bad. You can still beat Cornerstone 100%, with, like, just Munkidori damage and Ghost Eye. And then you beat DengoPult, you beat Zard, you beat Archaludon. Archaludon's kind of close, so I had to say anything about that one. But yeah, most of your matchups very good. You just don't want to hit Pult. If you play the 2-2 Melodic, your matchups, the deck's a lot less consistent. A lot of your matchups are still pretty good, but it's just, you know, you don't draw as well, so it's more likely that you just sort of lose to dead draws. But then at least you beat Pult. So both builds are fairly strong. I'd put them both in tier 1 with or without Melodic. And Zoroark, I am gonna put. How controversial do I want to be about this? I like Zoroark, honestly. I think I'm going to put it at the bottom of tier 2. I think that it's very underrated. I think I did talk about sort of the fact that it has some problems, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's, like, ever going to be the best play, because it doesn't look like we're going to get any additional options for it either, and the limited options are a huge problem for the deck. The build that I posted only plays 2 different attackers, and they're good, you know, like, Darmanitan is a really good attack, and that's sort of what Zoroark is going for it right now. Dark is a good type to be in a lot of matchups, and Fire is a good type to be in a lot of matchups, and Darmanitan's attack is really good, and that is what makes Zoroark good. I think that the ability to just draw a bunch of cards, hand us up to your opponent with cards like Iono and Fair Stamp, and sort of set up knockouts with Darmanitan and Reshiram, and the fact that your opponent has to, like, one-shot you to knock you out, otherwise you'll blow them up back with the Reshiram's first attack. I think these are all, like, really good things. I think being able to, like, boost your damage with Petrant is really cool. Mochi is really cool. And I think your, like, TeraBox matchup is fine. I think your DengoPult matchup is fine. I think your Gholdengo matchup is fine. But Walls is, like, unwinnable. Raging Bolt's a good matchup. Feraligatr is also really, really bad. And the deck is just sort of its options are good, and they're good into what is popular. However, your opponent just always knows what you can do. And it's not, your damage caps are super low. If your opponent can avoid benching stuff in certain matchups that you can hit for 210, like against Bolt, like, you just don't have good options for taking 2 prizes if your opponent's able to, like, set up without Teal, you know, and your opponent knows that. So things like that just make it really, really tough for the deck to succeed. But I think it is, like, it has a lot of good matchups naturally, and so I think it still deserves to be up here in tier 2. Ceruledge, I'm going to put in bottom tier 4. I just don't think this deck is very functional without Radiant Greninja and Pokestop. It just doesn't get enough energy in the discard pile fast enough, in my opinion. It's super reliant on Greninja, and that's just not available anymore. Eevees, I'm going to put in tier 3. I think it's like pseudo TeraBox, right? Like, I don't see it. I think this is like a fine deck, but, like, there's not a lot of reason to play it over TeraBox. Like, why play a bunch of evolutions to... It's like evolution of if I had to evolve into my attackers in TeraBox, you know? It does have the HP going for it that, you know, your Pokemon aren't always, like, just getting knocked out. So you're less liable to your opponent trying to play, like, the 2/2/2 prize game against you, but the attacking options are so much fewer and so much weaker, and it requires so much more setup. I think that the deck is definitely just like slightly worse than TeraBox, but it has like, it's still tier 3 deserving to me because it's honestly it is strong, it's fast, it can do a lot of damage quickly, and it has pretty solid matchups. I don't think that it hard loses to many things that I have on the list here. Hydreigon, I'm gonna put also in tier 4 above Ceruledge. Sort of similar problem to Mamoswine. I mean, we've lost Dark Patch, that's like one big loss, and then we've lost Lumen Rotom, which is of course a hit for all of the rare candy decks, but it just doesn't feel like Hydreigon's really doing enough to warrant the amount of setup it takes to try to set up a stage 2 Pokemon in this format, especially if you're trying to set up like any Obsidian play, which is like part of the appeal to Hydreigon, right, is Obsidian. And of course, decks don't have bench barrier anymore. That makes Obsidian really cool. But there's a lot of Terra Pokemon around that you just can't even hit with Obsidian. And it's 4 energy is just really hard to set up, like, in this format. It's really hard to set, like, Pidgeot was, like, really, really good in the deck because you could quick search for the Neo upper energy, right? You can still play something like Tenacity, but it's just not quite the same. I don't think you really have the space to fit in like a Noctowl engine into this. That could be one way to play the deck. It's not very consistent to try to set up a Pidgeot engine in this without Lumen and Rotom and Stone. So I think the deck just is lacking right now. But that's all the decks that I had to rate. I think that realistically, like, anything below tier 3, I'm not really... I think other than like PultZard, I think like is around, but I don't really like, I'm not invested in any of the decks below tier 3. I don't think any of them are really worth putting a ton of your time into. I think that some of them could be better than others, like PultZard definitely has the potential if people make it more consistent. If any of these decks were like more consistent, they might be better, but I just don't think any of these decks are capable of being consistent enough to be worth playing, in my opinion. Everything tier 1 and above, I think, are great deck. Honestly, anything starting with, honestly, tier 2 and above. I'm not a big fan of Archaludon and Zoroark. I think they're both lacking a bit. I think Gholdengo is maybe lacking a bit in certain matchups, I think, and options. I'd rather just play the DengoPult build. So I'd say anything starting with Charizard up, actually, is a great play. I think if you're considering one of those 8 decks, you're already in good shape. Keep playing those decks. I have guides on DengoPult, TeraBox, Feraligatr, Walls, and Zoroark already on my channel. I have a masterclass going up on the 1st on Raging Bolt, and I have an article for Schmitz's Corner on DengoPult Gholdengo, and I have an article on Metafy, on the TSS Metafy for Feature Box. So if you're interested in any of these decks up in the tier 2 and above, look no further. I hope you are able to get some good lists in there. I hope that this helps you make your decisions for what to actually invest your time into for the upcoming format. If you enjoyed this and want to check out any of my other content or my socials, all of that will be through the link tree in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.